Hello and welcome to another D&D Stories. I am your host, T the Writer. This is a show where I sit here and regale you with all the tabletop gaming stories and remember when something cool happened. So let's return now to the horrors of Highseat. Miles is at the squatter's bar and he's chasing down the pirate lord, not only to probably free his slave girl, but to see if he can find anything else out about the 5-star flesh hand. So, I've got my cue card front and back here. I've got a lot of stuff to go through today, so here we go. Now, Miles sees that this guy rents out his own room, he gets dinner, he takes a slave girl with him, he goes, like further down, because remember, this place is underground, so the rooms are deeper into the earth, not up on the second floor like a building that's on the surface. So he goes down a couple of staircases. Miles does much the same, trying to appear nonchalant. Yes, sir, I will have your finest cut of lamb and an extra big room for the night. 2 king beds. Ha 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 ha. That kind of thing. And he hands off X amount of gold pieces. And he decides that he's gonna kind of tail this guy, but he's in the room next to his. So he does the roguish thing because he's like level 4, level 5, I think. And he goes into his room. He's kind of like watching the guy out of the corner of his eye. He puts the key in. He goes into his room and he almost pulls the door shut. But he kind of peeks out into the hallway to see what this guy's up to. And the Pirate Lord, who I don't think ever got a name because Pirate Lord is fun to say, checks into his own room. He drops off the slave girl. He drops his effects and he goes off to one of the showering rooms, or whatever you want to call it, a scrubbing kind of place where you can get clean, change your clothes, all that good stuff. It's a seedy place, but they've got indoor plumbing. I don't know what the logic was there. But he heads off. Miles decides he knows how he's going to get the spring on this guy, because if he wandered down the hall in just a towel, then the best thing to do is going to be to jump him in his own room when he gets back. So he does the rogue thing, he undoes the lock, he kind of leans in, checks around, makes sure there's nobody else in the room, goes in, shuts the door, locks it, because he knows the guy took the key with him. And the slave girl is, of course, there with her little like chain thing on a bedpost. And as he's stepping in, she pulls her hood back to get a better look at him, and she's Rakshasa, or Rakshasa? The tiger people. She's a cat girl, because of course, right? We've already got an angry soldier and a demure former tavern wench. We already know this is a harem anime. Let's throw a cat girl into the mix, because fan service, and I like you a lot. So she, of course, freaks out a little. He's like, don't worry, I'm here to kill your master and set you free. He throws the diplomacy. Of course, it's high enough, and she's willing to believe him, because, hey, if the pirate lord dies, then that means that she's free, because his ship is on the coastline, and probably not a lot of his crew followed him several hundred miles inland to sell all these slaves. So if he gets taken out, she's as free as a bird. So she sits on her legs and she sits on the bed, real nice and pretty, to kind of wait for this guy to come back. And Miles hides in a shadowy corner, and she's about what you'd expect. She just doesn't have human ears. She's got cat ears on top of her head. She's cute and a little fuzzy, and her nose is darker than the rest of her face. Just insert random anime cat girl in there, if you will, for your visualizing. And Miles waits with like both daggers pulled. He's gonna jump this guy as soon as he comes in. And of course, 10, 15, 20 minutes go by. This guy comes back. He puts the key in the door, comes in. He's damp. He's just got his towel, muttering to himself about his pirate lord business, and Miles jumps him straight away. But if I remember right, pirate lord is actually a class, or was it? I don't remember. He had class levels in something like Buccaneer style, so Dread Pirate, that's what it was. Dread Pirate is a class. But it doesn't take him long to get a couple of daggers in the back and to stumble forward to grab his enchanted cutlass, which of course deals lightning damage. Now, why lightning damage? Because there's an awful lot of seawater out there, and if somebody's swimming up to your ship, you can just hit the water and electrocute everybody that's coming your way. That sounds incredibly dangerous, but he lives life on the edge. He's a pirate lord. So immediately a brawl breaks out between Miles and the pirate lord, and nobody's getting into this room to save him, and nobody would want to because it's the squatters bar. They don't exactly have a whole ton of security watching over every single ne'er-do-well that comes in here. So if it sounds like something rough is going on in one of their hotel rooms, he's probably just got a couple of whores in there with him. Who knows? But the sound of crashing metal and lightning arcing, you can see flashes of light under the door, stuff like that. And it's actually a fairly even fight, because if you do your math in Pathfinder, if somebody is your level, there's a 50-50 shot of you losing, just statistically speaking. So all the while, behind the screen, I'm rolling like will saves for the slave girl, who is of course attached to the bedpost. But what do all hotels come with? A jug of water and some cups to drink it with. So she overcomes her fear of her master with a rather outstanding roll, and she turns and she grabs the big heavy jug that's full of ice water, and she turns and she waits for an opportune moment and then just bashes him over the head with it. Shards of jug go everywhere. It wasn't glass, it was like clay or enamel, something like that. Something really strong that wouldn't just break automatically. But she was strong enough to break it over his fucking head, though. And that was enough to knock him out. And of course, Miles springs on him and does the double lung shot while he's flat on his back, and that's all that really takes. So Miles takes down the pirate lord, and he takes off his stupid pirate hat. He's like, yeah! He puts the pirate hat on. I was like, you're an idiot. But while she's kind of cowering in the corner, because that was pretty dang cold right then, he goes through the guy's effects. Of course, he's got the magic lightning cutlass and a sextant and a compass, and all the things you would expect to find on a pirate lord, along with quite a bit of gold. I think it was like 8,500 gold, 8,700 gold, whatever it was, for 5 or 6 slaves that are worth 1,700 gold apiece. It was pretty close to like 9 or 10 grand just straight away off this guy, and goes through like the pile of clothes that he left there, and there's not a lot of correspondence, but he does find an address or two, which is very valuable information. And finally he stands up, because he's this horrible wraith that just kind of broke into her master's room and, stabbed a fucker several times before she helped, and then he just straight up murdered the guy. This almost looked like a hit. And she's kind of standing there in the corner like, what happens to me now? And he's like, come with me if you want to live. What's your name? And she's got the big cat ears like turned back, like she's not so sure she should even touch this guy. He's like, don't worry, I'm here to protect you. I'm here to get you out of here. Slavery is wrong, even though it's legal in Highseat. Slavery is wrong. You should come with me and be free. And of course, this adds the +2 or the +3 or whatever it needs. And she says that her name is Annabelle. Now, of course, Annabelle is dressed in like the slave Leia stuff, because of course. And she pulls the pirate lord's like rain slicker. It's like this big black like shawl thing that goes from like neck to knee. So it's like a poncho, I guess. She kind of puts that on so she looks less like a slave. And of course, he goes up and he picks the lock on her iron collar and gets her slave manticles off. And he goes, why were you traveling with this guy? Were you like his personal concubine? Or I was like, no, he made me carry things, and I was the cabin girl on his ship, and all these things. Like, you're kind of exotic for a for a cabin girl. It's like, well, he's in the slave trade. You know, people of all shapes and sizes and colors would go from wherever to Highseat to be sold off. He just decided he liked cat girls the most. And he's like, oh, okay, fair enough. Every man has his own taste, but he's dead and has holes in his lungs. So, you're free, Annabelle. Why don't you come with me for a while? And she's like, all right, as long as I can get out of this shady place and you know, not have to be a slave anymore. It's like, I am my own woman. I'm going to be free and do what I damn well please now because he's fucking dead and I piss on your grave and etc. etc. She's finding her anger now that she's out of the manticles. And you can tell she's got claws. So, you know, the pirate lord must have made her very fearful of him if he didn't bother to, like, snip her claws or declaw her entirely because, like, she could kind of do the Wolverine kind of thing, and she's got, like, inch-long tiger claws at the end of her fingers. It's pretty wild. So, Annabelle ended up being a great addition to the party, but we will get into that later. So, let me check my notes real quick. And of course, there is a pirate lord involved, so he has a treasure map. And if you're working in such a business where it's like 1,700 gold a head for slaves, then definitely need a place to hoard all your gold. So he's like, hey, treasure map, awesome. He puts that away as well. And, you know, that mission kind of being done, he took out almost all the cultists, or I think he did take all the cultists out. There were like 4 or 5 of them, and he took out the pirate lord that was supplying them with slaves. So that was definitely a major blow to the 5-star flesh hand. Took a ton of their money and took away their slave supplier. So they're gonna start noticing that something's up pretty soon. So Miles and Annabelle gotta get out of there before somebody notices. So they grab the guy's body, they put him up in the bed, and they throw pillows everywhere. They throw the comforter over, and like, yeah, he'll just look like he's asleep. He'll put his hat on his face like he didn't even bother to take his hat off. He was so tired. And they hide the slave chains under the bed, etc., etc. And, you know, they peek out into the hallway. It doesn't look like anybody noticed, and they book it. They leave the squatter's bar with the treasure map and all the correspondence from the cultists and all the money and all that good stuff. So they go out to meet Jocelyn. And Jocelyn, who was waiting outside the squatter's bar because, you know, somebody might recognize her as a city guard, whether she's in, like, nondescript chainmail or not. So she was waiting outside in case Miles, you know, ran out the door screaming with a dozen cultists on his ass. Turns out, no, he came out with a treasure map and a cat girl, so she kind of rolls her eyes and goes, all right, fine, whatever. So that mission was a pretty nice success. And they go back to the hideout at Miles's old place. And of course, everybody has a nice howdy-do. Madeline and Jocelyn and Annabelle kind of introduce themselves. They get a couple of details. Annabelle tells her, you know, she was a slave. She was a former cabin girl for this pirate lord whose name is so foul he will not even be spoken of in Highseat. So she's glad to have her freedom, and not unlike things were with Dancy, she decides that she kind of owes Miles a life debt, that if he's going to start busting up the slave trade here in Highseat, which is kind of what he's doing while he's also battling the 5-star flesh hand, if they're buying slaves left and right and they bust up, you know, slavers that are hanging around Highseat, legal though it may be, she's in for it. She wants to help. So Annabelle has joined the party. Da-na-na, na-na-na-na-na-na. Would you like to give a nickname to Annabelle? Shut up. Annabelle has been transferred to Box 1. Shut up. What type of Pokemon is he? Shut up. She's, fighting? I guess she'd be a fighting type. But Breaking Annabelle down into stats, I think like the closest thing for her would be like a monk, because she couldn't wield weapons, but she had like claws, so she would be using unarmed attacks. I was like, yeah, I'll just give her like a couple of levels of monk or something like that. I'm sure she's an exotic race, so there's like a payment for levels, etc., etc. It's like when you play a minotaur. Level 1, level 2, level 3, you can't have any classes because you're paying to be a minotaur. I forget what that's called. Level adjustment. Yeah. Her level adjustment made up for that, so she had like a couple of levels of monk, and that was enough. Um, so let's see. They kind of take stock of everything they've got, and let's see. Miles notices that they've got, a pretty good amount of money, a pretty good amount of like supplies that they've just straight up taken from these guys. So he goes and he decides it's time to go on a shopping trip, and he's taking Jocelyn and Annabelle with him. Now, Madeline still has plenty to do, kind of nest building there, and she doesn't really have class levels in anything, so she's going to be like their homemaker, I guess, while Annabelle will be their monk and Jocelyn will be their fighter, or knight, or whatever you want to call that. So he decides that he needs to start outfitting the girls if they're going to be in his adventuring party. And I was like, oh, here we go, the shopping montage, got it. So he takes them out into the city, as you might expect, and I don't hear from Miles, the player, for like a week. And I don't remember if we were doing it face to face or if it was over like Discord for certain parts of the campaign, but I don't hear from him for like a week. Turns out he was doing some pretty heavy shopping with the amount of money that he got. So I think Annabelle ended up with like an amulet of mighty fists, which is like adding +1/+2 to unarmed attacks, which, with claws really helps a lot. Jocelyn ended up with like a belt of bull strength, and just a bunch of things. I think he got like a piece of jewelry for Madeline as a thank you for cleaning up the secret lair, things like that. He wanted to outfit them. Meanwhile, I'm behind the DM's curtain. I don't have a full character sheet for these women, so I had to go to the NPC codex that I've got here, this teal one. I was like, okay, I need like a 5th level fighter, and I'm flipping pages, and I copy all that down, and then I add the magic items that he gets for Jocelyn, and then I need like a 2nd or 3rd level monk, and then give her a couple of hit dice, and then add Rakash, or whatever it is, cat people on top of that, and I'm furiously going through stats while he's telling me all these things that he's buying for them, and of course they get skimpy armor, because of course they do, and Annabelle ends up in like these big like pillow sleeve pants, like you see Aladdin in the Disney film, and she's got the amulet between her boobs, because of course, and all that good stuff. So he outfits them because he knows it's gonna get worse really soon. If I'm loading him up on party members, he knows it's about to turn bad. So he buys potions, he buys a new set of daggers, he buys a new a couple of things to just kind of outfit themselves a little more. I think he landed at the end of that mission. He had like 17,000 gold or something. So plenty to like get rings of protection and potions and things like that. So they upgrade themselves. And we do some character development. We still know Jocelyn's grumpy and kind of doesn't want to be there, but doesn't have a lot of choice. But she gets to buy a shiny new sword that makes her happy. She gets to get a haircut, get her hair colored a little more to be more of a wheat color instead of a golden blonde. That she kind of perfects her disguise, since the city guard is corrupt and looking for her, and she gets like a new cloak and things like that. She kind of outfits herself to look like a different person without having to like use magic or anything for it, so that goes well for her. And we learn that Annabelle is certainly kind of a wildcat. She climbs shelves in the magic item stores to reach for things that she wants. Get down from there, young lady. No, I can reach it myself. Ah! and then she falls, and she lands on all fours because she's a cat, and of course. And how distracting it is for all the men around her because she's got a tail that it never stops moving. And they do a lot of shopping, and this just kind of goes on and on for a while. It's like Annabelle was not really raised by pirates, but had been around them long enough. She's got a dirty mouth. She swears like a sailor. She climbs things. She has no problem getting into your personal space if she's having an argument, things like that. She's kind of rough around the edges, but she's exotic and different compared to Madeline and Jocelyn. It's around this time that I think Miles started to realize he was kind of in a harem anime. And he was kind of looking back and forth between these three women. Dancy is a thing of the past, and he cared nothing for her. But between Madeline, a former bar wench, Jocelyn, a former city guard, and Annabelle, a former cabin girl and slave, he realizes he might have, like, romance options going on. I was like, oh, here we go. Okay, I'm straightening some papers. I was like, there's a side plot about to unfold here. And he decides that he kind of wants to go for Jocelyn. And I go, really? Is it because she slept with you? And he goes, no, it's because she seems... what was his reasoning? Is like, she seems she needs... It was like the opposite of a woman's touch. I don't want to say a man's touch because that sounds kind of perverted, but like Madeline is well adjusted because she worked for herself. She was a prostitute for a while. She came up out of that. She was rescued from monsters. She kind of knows how the world works. Annabelle was a slave for a while, but she's got a lot of issues that need working through. Jocelyn rose through the military ranks and it was like strict and strong and kind of a little bit grouchy, kind of the tsundere, if you will, if you know your anime terms. The girl that doesn't like you, but she does like you. And he found that attractive, apparently, out of the three. I guess she has like the strongest foundation as a character. I don't know. I didn't ask him for all the details of his preference in women. I was like, okay, I need to... so I start writing like little side things, like, you know, if he gets her a gift, if he offers dinner, if he does this or that, you know, what might the roles be, etc., etc. Because I don't mind stringing romance through a campaign. Sometimes it's tavern wenches, it's fertility goddesses, it's centaurs, and they don't... they have boobs, but they don't have shirts. There's fan service, and then there's actually kind of dating in D&D. And that's kind of hard to do if you have 4 players, because essentially you're flirting with the DM, and it can get weird. But in a duet game, maybe not. I don't know if that makes any sense to you guys. Put in the comments below if you've ever kind of had a romance subplot go on, and what happened? Did you get made fun of? Did that crash and burn? Did your DM use it against you? Was it a succubus at the end of the day? Kind of discuss that in the comments below. Anyway, Miles decides that he wants to try to kind of woo Jocelyn. So after the shopping trip, they take everything home, they make sure everything fits, etc., etc. They recount their gold pieces. They ran all the diplomacy checks to try and haggle the prices lower. It didn't really work. Because if you're paying 8,000 gold for something, the diplomacy check to get a discount on any of that's going to be pretty damn high. I'm sorry. But powerful magic items take every gold piece. But he decides he's going to take Jocelyn out to dinner, which is innocent enough. He takes her to a regular sit-down place. They kind of have the flavor text conversation about the 5-star flesh hand and, how far up the ranks it goes. If the princess is afraid of her father finding out and he had to punch her the fuck out, etc., etc., the 5-star flesh hand probably has tendrils just about everywhere, so they have to be extra careful. And they kind of talk shop for a while, but he does pay for the meal. He does walk next to her on the way home, and they point out, star constellations to one another. And she is a grumpy Gus, when there are other people around, but she's a little softer when it's just the two of them. So that he might have his foot in the door. It's hard to tell. She's kind of hard to read. His Miles's sense motive is not especially high, so Jocelyn's like soldier training, don't show emotion, don't show if something upsets you to the enemy, that kind of thing is clearly working in her favor. So it's going to take a couple more dates, a couple more dinners before maybe they can get into like a more intimate setting, a more intimate conversation. So that day kind of comes and goes. What else? Dinner, talking. They get everybody up to speed with what happens. Annabelle does put in, though, that she knows where a bunch of the slaves that the pirate lord had were being kept. Or not kept, but rather sent to. They were kept in one location until they were bought, and then they were sent off somewhere else with the cultists holding the end of their chains. So Miles gets an address from Annabelle, and they strap on all their new magic items, and they eat really, really well, and they put their bandoliers of potions on, etc., and they decide that they're going to go raid this place. And they go 3 on however many guys there are in there. Are you sure? And he goes, yeah, this is our next breadcrumb. If we can starve them of the SPO component that they need, which is people, then it will grind them to a halt. Not to mention we still have to deal with the so-called ambassador. And if they're sending slaves to whatever this location is, maybe the ambassador is like eating them or draining them of their life force or whatever it happens to be. And I go, that's good logic. That's a shot in the dark, and you have no evidence for that, but that's good logic. Meanwhile, I'm writing that shit down in my GM notes. But they decide that they're going to go check this place out. And sure enough, they find this like old abandoned building like in the lower end of town. Not really like a warehouse, but like an old like 3 or 4 story building that has like candles in some of the windows and darkness and boards on some of the other windows. So it looks like half abandoned, but clearly somebody's home. And there's not a lot of guard patrols that come by here, so they wait for cover of night. And they come back, and it's Miles and Jocelyn and Annabelle, and they're gonna figure this out. It's like, Annabelle, can you see in the dark? Because you're a cat person. And she goes, yes, of course. It's like, okay, so we only need two, what was it? Not cat's eye potions. Are they cat's eye potions? I forget. There's potions that make you see in the dark. I forgot what they're called. But Miles gets one and Jocelyn gets one. They drink them. They're going to go down into this place. Or they're going to go into this place. And as soon as Miles, like they go around the back. As soon as Miles undoes the lock on the door and they open it, they find that the building is false. They can look up and see that there are no floors. It's just a big empty shell. It's like a pop-up shop or something like that. But whatever building was here, they knocked out all the walls. They knocked out all the floors and hallways and doors, and it's literally just there to sit where it is and pretend to be a building. So all the candles that are in some of the windows, they're probably ever-burning candles that go on and off at certain times of day to kind of give the illusion that somebody is home. But they look across this dirt floor, and of course there's stairs that go down into the earth, because of course it's a dungeon. It has to be that way. But it's very cold, and it's very dark, so it's underground. Away from the sun, away from the busy streets of Highseat. And they go, okay, so we're going to go in this order, and we're going to go down here, and we're going to kill every cultist we see, and if there's slaves here, we're going to free them, and if the ambassador's here, God help us, or Paylor help us, whatever. Jocelyn kind of crosses herself a little bit, because they have no idea what the ambassador is, because it was like a football-shaped, like piece of molten light that shot out of that sarlacc and deep into the city. They didn't see where it landed, so if it's here, it might fuck them over. So they gotta go in quiet. And of course, Miles has 4 or 5 levels of rogue, and Annabelle is a cat person, so she kind of goes on all fours with her tail up and her amulet kind of dangling back and forth. She's got like +12 in sneak or move silently or what have you. And she's fine. Jocelyn, on the other hand, is in chainmail and has 5 levels of fighter, so she has to trail them by like 40 feet, so nobody hears them. So they work out like a stop, a go this way, different like signals. You see it like baseball games and stuff where they can communicate with hand signals. I go, that if this was an older version of D&D, that would be innuendo, saying something without saying it, which includes hand motions. So they work out like 5 signals, and they head inside. And again, like I usually say with D&D or Pathfinder or whatever, crawling a dungeon isn't that fascinating to talk about, because you're just kind of playing the game. Whatever traps you come across, whatever monsters you find, it's not super important to the story. But this under the building, under this like shell thing is like it's a culty hiding place. So if you recall, when Miles was going through the waterways underground under Highseat at the very beginning of the campaign, he bobbed and weaved and went through and went past like 14 exits and could not have walked past more exits than he actually did, so he was under there for days. This was just the opposite. I had laid out the dungeon in such a way that there would be like several directions that he could have gone. Like I think the first room had, the stairs that go down. There's a big main room with not a lot in it, and then there was like, you can go left, you can go right, or you can go straight. And he goes to the right, and the right goes directly to the final boss. And I was like, here we go, this is happening, all right. So they end up going further down into this underground lake kind of area. Well, not lake, but it's like a pond. It's like 60 feet across and maybe 10 or 12 feet deep. And it's more like a cave system down that far. What they didn't expect to find, though, was all the plant life hanging from the ceiling. And if you've heard any of my other D&D stories, you know exactly what this is. And it doesn't take long for them to be snatched up by a chaos beast. And a chaos beast is exactly what it sounds like. It's a big ball of eyes and mouths and endless reaching tentacles that can be covered with leaves. I think they're aberrations or outsiders or something like that, but I usually treat them as like plant monsters because they're green and they're usually very far-reaching because they don't have like humanoid shapes. They plant themselves in one location and they stay still until you get close enough to get grabbed up and chewed in half. So of course the boss fight starts, and Jocelyn is the MVP this time around because again she's the fighter, she's got the biggest sword and does the most damage, etc., etc. So she's running in, mulching this thing, while Annabelle is in the background with like a tentacle around her waist, like flailing as it bashes her against the wall, bashes her against the ceiling, bashes her against everything. She's trying to claw at this thing, and when she gets like down to the tentacle's core and it snaps off, she falls like 20 feet, lands on all fours because she's a cat and she can do that. And of course, Miles runs in there with his daggers just kind of swinging every which way. Feint attack, rah, feint attack, rah. And feint attacks are very hard to do if there are eyeballs all over the monster in question. So they fight and they fight and they fight. But the horrible thing about Chaos Beasts is their ability to turn you into a lump of sponge. Basically, I don't remember if it's like a venom or a stinger or a bite or if it's a spell. I forget how they do it. But once you are affected by this ability, you kind of go and you have to make a like a will save or a fortitude save to really, really not fall into like a spongy mess of like eyeballs and teeth and like a spinal cord, and that's all that's left of you. So of course Miles takes it full in the face, and right as this boss fight is ending, it basically falls from the ceiling on top of him, and he is pinned and hit with this ability. And I'm such a terrible narrator because I don't remember as far as Chaos Beasts go. It might be a spell-like ability, actually, but he starts to kind of like sag, like he's lost his bones or something. And I go, you've basically got 3 tries to not turn into a spongy mess and lose your mind. So, good luck! He rolls it the first time. Fails. Rolls it the second time. Fails. I go, if you fail this again, that's it. You realize that, right? Jocelyn and Annabelle are staring at you in horror as your skin turns pale and porous, and you drop your weapons and you start to like sag out of your shirt, out of your levels, as your neck can't support your head. It kind of flops over sideways while your nose travels down your cheek. And I go, if you fail this again, that's it. You're going to be a blob, and that's going to be the end of you. Rolls it a third time, makes it by 1. And I was like, rogues do not have very good will saves, do they? And he goes, no, they don't. So all of his stuff kind of back into place. It was like, you almost turned into a nightmare blob. I hope you know that. That boss fight notwithstanding, you had 3 chances and failed 2 of them. So, good job, I guess. So he is, of course, very upset by this, because when it comes to monsters that have insta-kill abilities like that, like beholders and their death rays, or dragons and like being right in front of their breath weapons, things that you get like 1 chance or you die, stuff like that. Most players don't think that's very fair, but again, the philosophy at my table is that if you can't fail, why are you playing? So I was ready to kill him off because he failed twice. I was like, yeah, this is the end of the campaign. I'm starting to kind of put my papers to one side. Rolled again, but he makes it by 1. I was like, oh, okay. Put my stuff back. I was like, okay, you managed to kill it. You killed the Chaos Beast and it's all of its gibbering, whispering mouths. And he goes, was that the ambassador? And I go, probably so. I mean, it has eyes, it has a mouth. It was clearly saying something, but you don't know, like, abyssal. You don't know the chaotic languages from beyond the stars that something like that would be gibbering to cultists. So whatever it was saying, you didn't understand it, but you managed to kill it, so good job. He's like, yes. So the ambassador, the mouthpiece of whatever greater evil the cult is communicating with, is gone, at least for now. They might be able to summon another one. It doesn't seem likely, given how complicated the other summoning was, but at least for now, the greater evil has no speaking voice to tell the cult what to do to further its machinations. So, good job, Miles and company. And of course, Jocelyn's over there double tapping it with her sword to make sure it's dead, to make sure it's not going to get up and crawl away or do some horrible tentacle hentai bullshit when they turn their backs. And Annabelle, in a ferocious fit of catgirl rage, kind of pries open one of its mouths, so there's like goop shooting everywhere, and some of its teeth break off, and she finds one of its stomachs, because of course it has more than one stomach, it's a chaos beast. But inside they find some loot, because of course it's a boss fight, you gotta have loot. And they find the pauldrons of the dragon's grin, these shoulder pieces that look like dragon heads that spew like a black smoke, and they're really cool looking, and they give like a +3 to intimidate and a +1 to armor. And of course they put them on Miles and he feels extra cool. So that was neat. Along with like the bits and remains of those that it had chewed up before. So they find some gold pouches and a couple of other mostly ruined stuff, but a couple of gold purses and some skulls and things like that in its monstrous belly. And they kind of chop it up into little pieces. They were very paranoid that it was just going to get up and start chasing them again. So they cut it up into little pieces. They throw it into the pond. They watch the pond turn green. And they call it done. So, hey, that was a big check mark off the list. They took out the ambassador. But there is still much of the dungeon to explore. They beelined right for that final boss fight. So Miles is pulling out the potions. He's pulling out the wand of cure minor wounds. He's healing everybody back up. They've got more to look at now that we've killed it and made sure that Miles did not turn into a big sponge blob. Another wing that they went into was actually the cult's treasury. Now, of course, snatching people off the street to serve as spell components, virgin sacrifices, because of course, can be kind of hard and can draw the regular members of the city guard. But if you buy slaves, that requires a lot of money. So they have a lot of money stored away. And after going through several rotating blade traps and other nasty things like that in this long trap-filled hallway, they do come across the cult's treasury, the standing riches of the 5-star flesh hand are all piled into this one room like a dragon's hoard. It's amazing. There's three chests of loot laying on one on each wall. There's piles of gold pieces just kind of poured every which way. They weren't really getting ready to spend it all at once, so they just kind of threw it every which way. There's barrels of silver pieces, stuff like that. And of course, Miles, being the roguish sort who loves his loot, is like, ah! And they hold the ion torch high, and they kind of look around, ooh, and all the gold pieces sparkle and shimmer. And Miles, checks around. He checks the chests for traps and locks and stuff like that, and they gather it all up, and it ends up being something to the tune of 28,000 gold pieces, which I think is 15 or 16 slaves worth of gold if you're dividing it by 1,700 a head, but still quite a bit of money to get all at once. Plus, a silver chest set or a fertility goddess statue, a bunch of clothes. There's a bunch of little things. It's like when you build a dragon's hoard. The least interesting thing is the money, but they find a +2 dagger that also does acid damage. They find a ring of protection +3, which is a great find. They find a ring of featherfall. They find boots of sneaking. They find a bunch of enchanted culty robes and a bunch of enchanted pendants that add +1 to intimidate or add +1 to charm, etc., etc. So they get a bunch of cool little things that they could pick their favorites and sell the rest. And just the raw money was 28,000 gold. And by then, they're, level 6, I think? Yeah, I think that boss put Miles over level 6. And I keep the party at the same level as him because they're NPCs. But Jocelyn is, of course, very happy. She's piling gold pieces into her bags. They've got a bag of holding, so of course, when you go dungeon delving, you always need a bag of holding for all the loot you're going to find. They pile everything into the bag of holding. She's smiling pretty big, which is kind of unusual for her, so Miles decides, you know what, you hang on to all the loot. That clearly makes her happy. You hang on to all the loot until we get out of here, and we'll divide it up later. So Jocelyn puts that into her adventuring backpack, and she's looking pretty happy because they found a whole bunch of treasure, and who doesn't love treasure? So, among those things, they also find one of my trademark magic items that I try to drop into almost all my campaigns, which is the Mask of Flawless Disguise. The Mask of Flawless Disguise is a one-time use item. You put it on, it works for you, and then you take it off and it turns into dust. A Mask of Flawless Disguise adds a +20 to your next disguise check. Whether you've got a disguise kit or not, you can put it on You can look like anybody as long as they're like within one size category of you. You can be a large creature, you can be a small creature, and you can look like anybody in particular. So Miles decides to keep that bit out of all the treasure in case he sees like a socializing area for the cultists and he's going to go in and pretend to be one of them. I don't know what his plans were, but he hung on to that in particular out of all the loot, along with the acid dagger, because who doesn't love daggers that do acid damage? But it was like carved from the fangs of a black dragon. It still dripped green and stuff like that. It was really cool. They did find a cultist down there, down another one of the hallways. This was more of a base than it was a dungeon. Like, there were only really traps in sensitive areas. But Miles came to call him the mailman because they didn't bother to ask his name. Not that they were gonna, but Miles called him the mailman, so that's what I'll call him as well. They find basically that there's one guy writing most of the correspondence for the cult. Like, at one point when they were back at their hideout, Miles was like comparing all the letters that they'd found on all the different cultists, like that said, we're gonna be here, or we're gonna do this, or make sure you bring the slaves to this address, or pile this much money into your purse before you show up in front of the pirate lord, all that kind of stuff. And they compared all the letters, and almost all of them have the same handwriting. So this guy isn't necessarily their leader, but he is a correspondent that sends information out in all different directions. So he is a valuable target to those of us who have sneak attack and a brand new acid dagger +2. So yeah, Miles decides he's gonna put on the mask of flawless disguise, and he's gonna pretend to be one of the cultists from the squatter's bar. He's like, yeah, I'm back from such and such, and how are things? Are things progressing smoothly? Like vague conversation stuff to not betray himself. And he's got the mask, so it's a +20 to disguise to look like the other guy plus whatever he rolls. So there's no fucking way this guy's gonna look over his shoulder and go, who are you? No, he's gonna go, oh, hey, you're back, and like keep writing at his desk. So they basically find like an underground study. There's like grimoires and shit on all of the shelves all around the room, and skulls and raven skeletons, and he's writing all this correspondence out to the other branches of the 5-star flesh hand and sending them out via message, via owl. I don't know how they would deliver stuff so quickly, but it didn't come up at the time. But they get a little bit of information about it out of that. There's a big cult meeting coming up very soon, in a couple of weeks, to hear what the ambassador has to say from he who should not be named. And they're like, the ambassador, the ambassador's already dead. He doesn't know that, shut up. But they learn there's going to be a big culty meeting coming up in like 2 or 3 weeks. Like, I think they put it at the full moon or something that would have to do with this big ritual that's coming up. That the master himself would show up, speak through the ambassador, but he would be there in the flesh, which is very important, because if they want to take out the source of all this madness, they probably ought to want to be there as well. So, of course they kill this guy, because he doesn't see it coming. Annabelle, who has, again, a +12, a +15 to stealth, is sneaking up behind this guy while he's hunched over his writing desk. She's like on all fours with her cat claws, shink, shink, coming out of the end of her fingers. And Miles is coming up behind him with the new acid dagger and one of his regular daggers, and he's like, 1, 2, 3, and they stab him like Miles puts a dagger in each lung. That's kind of his go-to move. It's horrible. And then Annabelle gets her claws around the guy's neck and basically like pulls his fucking neck open out the front, and like his Adam's apple goes flying across the desk. It's horrible. And this guy doesn't even know what hit him and drops. So they loot him and they take a bunch of the grimoires to burn later because you know your Call of Cthulhu, you shouldn't look into grimoires, you'll go mad. But they take a bunch of his shit and they put it into the bag of holding. You know, one more cultist down, put a little another notch in our belts or whatever for the sheer number of guys that we've taken out. But there's probably going to be other guys down here, so they decide that they're not done yet. They need to completely explore this place to kind of like shed as much blood as they can before they realize that the ambassador has been assassinated and their correspondent, or their mailman, excuse me, their ambassador has been assassinated, their mailman has been assassinated, and they're going to know that somebody knows they're there and is actively working against them. So they do. They go and they find another minor ritual being done by just 4 cultists in a side room somewhere. That's they've got like their big culty magic circle. They're growing like this nightmare plant. That's it's like a bellflower, if you've ever seen one of those. It's a flower that hangs down and kind of waddles like a bell in the breeze, but it's big. It's like the size of their heads. And they're over there doing their culty shit. And it doesn't take Jocelyn long to be like, yep, there they are. And she kicks in the door, much to Miles's horror. And of course she takes like half a dozen wand of magic missiles to the chest before she closes the distance and decapitates the first guy. Okay, Annabelle, apparently Jocelyn's leading the charge. Ah! And they charge in, and of course, a bunch of dorks in robes with wands of magic missile are not going to stand a chance against these guys. So they thought their safety was in secrecy, not so much. But the nightmare plant that they were growing has other things that it's going to do. So the bell lifts up and kind of points the face of the plant at them, and they see there's a giant, like, vein-covered eyeball in there, and Jocelyn seizes up in terror because it has, like, a fear aura around it when it looks at her, and she just instantly goes mad and clutches at her hair, and of course Miles jumps in with the acid dagger. Ah, string! And it's like something out of an anime. It just kind of slowly slides off of its stalk and falls over dead and bursts into flames, and it's instantly gone. I was like, how much damage did you roll? I was like, can you sneak attack a plant? You know what? I'm going to give you that. It has eyes, and it was looking at a different direction. I'm going to say you can sneak attack that plant. So it was the sneak attack damage plus the regular damage plus the acid damage to take this thing out. And Jocelyn's sanity is restored, and it looks like the dungeon has been cleared out. So it's time to run for it before the other cultists show up at their culty hideout and realize that the ambassador's dead, the mailman is dead, their bellflower is dead, and a bunch of their other guys are dead. So time to hamscray before they can put a face to their new and very potent enemies. And that is where we will stop for today. So I hope you guys like that story. The horrors of Highseat continue on as we drive the knife deeper and deeper into the 5-star Flesh Hands plans. Who else is there left to kill? I guess we'll have to find out, because we're taking these fuckers apart piece by piece. But who is their shadowy master, the one that shall not be named? The name that all children know and no adult dares speak. Who is it? Who could it possibly be? Maybe we'll find out next time here on D&D Stories. Keep gaming. Thanks for listening. Hit that like button for me. If you'd like to hear more stories by me, please check out my audio novels here on YouTube. They're available for free. Cyranox the Feared is swords and sorcery, and Shield Maiden is all about superheroes. Check them out for me, and if you're feeling extra generous, I do have a Patreon as well. Links in the description below. Keep gaming.